"Watch this TikTok, Grandma. It's gonna be fire." Those were the words my grandson Leo said just before he drew back his foot. The world didn't slow down, there was no dramatic music. There was just the sight of his brand new ridiculously expensive sneaker connecting with the thin metal spoke of my wheelchair's front wheel. There was a sound, a pathetic groan of metal giving way like an animal in pain. It wasn't a loud snap, but a sickening grinding tear. The chair, my prison and my prop for the last 2 years, lurched violently to the right. My body, trained to be frail, followed its momentum. I didn't fall out, which might have been a mercy. Instead I slumped, wedged at a brutal angle against the armrest, my head lolling, my left side pinned and screaming in protest. The broken wheel splayed outwards, a crippled limb. I was trapped. And then came the other sound. Laughter. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a full-throated, uninhibited roar of amusement from the living room. It was my son David, his deep baritone, a sound that once calmed my childhood fears, now a jagged blade in my gut. And it was his wife Sarah, her laughter a high tinkling cascade of pure, unadulterated cruelty. I could see them through the doorway, lounging on the beige sectional that I had picked out with my late husband, Robert. Sarah had her feet tucked under her, a glass of red wine held delicately in her hand. David was leaning back, his head thrown back in mirth, his phone forgotten on his chest. They weren't looking at me with concern. They were watching a show. Their show. Leo, my 16-year-old grandson, stood over me, his own phone held high, the camera lens a single black, unblinking eye. He was framing the shot, capturing my humiliation in perfect high definition. I could see my own distorted reflection in the dark screen. A mess of gray hair, a face slack with practiced helplessness, a body contorted in a broken chair. He wasn't looking at his grandmother. He was looking at his content. "Dude, that was perfect," he crowed, his thumb swiping and tapping across the screen. A tinny, obnoxious song, some viral clip of a cartoon character slipping on a banana peel, began to play from his phone speaker. He was already editing, adding a soundtrack to my silent scream. He angled the phone down again, zooming in on the mangled wheel, then panning up to my face. I held my expression, the mask of a bewildered, helpless old woman I had perfected over 730 days. Inside, a glacier was forming. A cold, hard mass of something that had once been love was now freezing into something else entirely. Something sharp and unforgiving. "Did you get it?" David called out, a grin still plastered on his face. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't move to help. "Got it. This is gonna get so many views," Leo replied, his voice buzzing with the thrill of his petty triumph. Sarah took a sip of her wine. "Leo, you're terrible," she said, but her words were wrapped in a blanket of laughter, stripping them of any meaning, of any reprimand. She thought it was funny. A harmless prank. They all did. They left me there, slumped and broken in my metal cage. Leo went to the kitchen, probably to get a snack, the victor enjoying his spoils. David and Sarah turned back to the television, their brief moment of entertainment over. The sound of a game show host's enthusiastic voice filled the silence where a son's concern should have been. I was an object, a piece of furniture that had malfunctioned in an amusing way. Lying there, with the sharp edge of the armrest digging into my ribs and the cold dread solidifying in my veins, I knew the performance was over. The long, agonizing wait had reached its conclusion. The mask I had so carefully crafted, the mask of a frail post-stroke invalid, was no longer a shield for me to hide behind. That was the moment it became a weapon. The chill from the floorboard seeped into my bones, reminding me of a different kind of cold. The quiet, profound emptiness of my birthday just a few weeks prior. It had been a Tuesday, the 68th anniversary of my arrival on this earth, and the second one I would mark without Robert. I woke up that morning to silence. Not a peaceful, comforting silence, but a heavy, deliberate one. The house was an echo chamber of their absence. I had wheeled myself from my small downstairs room, once Robert's proud home office, now my designated holding cell, into the main living area. The air was still. No scent of coffee, no sound of the morning news. A note was on the kitchen counter, scrawled on the back of a grocery receipt in Sarah's loopy, self-important handwriting. Mom, it read. Took Leo for his dental appointment. Back later. Left you some oatmeal in the microwave. The oatmeal was a congealed, gray lump in a plastic bowl. I stared at it for a long time. It felt like a perfect metaphor for the life they had assigned me. Cold, tasteless, and served with utter indifference. I ate it because the part one was playing required me to be dependent. The real me, the former head nurse who could manage a chaotic or during a citywide blackout, wanted to hurl the bowl against the wall. They returned around noon, bustling in with the manufactured stress of busy, important people. David barely glanced at me, already on his phone, barking orders at some subordinate. Yeah, just push the deadline. I don't care what they say. Leo grunted a hey as he passed, his face buried in his own screen. Sarah was the one who delivered the news, her voice dripping with the fake, cloying sympathy she had mastered. She knelt beside my wheelchair, a move designed to look compassionate, but which only ever felt condescending, putting her face level with mine. She smelled of expensive perfume and deceit. So, Mom, she began, patting my hand with her cool, dry fingers. About tonight. You know we wanted to do a big thing for your birthday, a really special dinner. I kept my face placid, my eyes wide and waiting. I knew what was coming. Well, David made reservations at the Gilded Spoon. It's that new fusion place downtown. It's just, well, you know how those places are. She sighed, a theatrical puff of air. It's going to be so loud and so crowded. And with your condition, all that noise and commotion wouldn't be good for you. It would be too much stimulation. We were worried it might trigger your anxiety. My condition. My anxiety. Words they had invented and assigned to me, tools to build the walls of my cage. We just want what's best for you, she finished, squeezing my hand a little too tightly. David finally looked up from his phone, his expression a mask of strained sincerity. She's right, Mom. We'll celebrate with you here tomorrow. We'll get a cake, something quiet. Just us. He looked away again, his duty done. I nodded slowly, letting a flicker of disappointment show on my face, just enough to be convincing. I understand, I murmured, my voice a practiced, wavering whisper. You all. Have fun. They left at 7. Sarah was wearing a new silk dress that shimmered under the porch light. David had put on the expensive cologne I bought him for Christmas, the one he said he was saving for a special occasion. Leo slouched behind them in a clean hoodie, looking bored. They didn't say goodbye so much as call it over their shoulders as they rushed to the car. Be good, Mom. Don't wait up. And then they were gone. The silence that descended was heavier than before. It was a weighted blanket of absolute solitude. I sat in my wheelchair in the dark living room, watching the headlights of their luxury SUV sweep across the lawn and disappear down the street. They didn't bring me a slice of cake. The quiet celebration David promised for the next day never materialized. It was forgotten, a throwaway line to assuage a fleeting flicker of guilt. My real birthday present came later that night, delivered through the cold and personal glow of my smartphone. Out of a morbid curiosity I couldn't resist, I opened Instagram. And there it was. Sarah's story. A video of a glittering champagne flute, raised to clink against David's. The caption, in a swirling pink font, read, "Celebrating with my love." The next slide was a picture of their main course. Glistening steaks, elaborate swirls of sauce on pristine white plates. The plates I was no longer allowed to use, lest my trembling hands drop and break them. My meals were served on the chipped plastic plates left over from Leo's toddler years. Then came the centerpiece of their digital celebration, a video of the restaurant staff bringing a dessert to their table, a single candle flickering on a decadent-looking chocolate lava cake. They were singing happy birthday. Not to me, the woman whose birthday it actually was, but to the table, to the celebration itself. David was laughing, his arm around Sarah. Leo was recording the whole thing on his own phone, a wide grin on his face. The final post was a smiling family selfie. David, Sarah, and Leo, cheeks flushed with wine and good food. The caption was the final twist of the knife. It read, "Family is everything. So blessed to have these two. Family first, making memories." I sat there in the dark, the only light in the room coming from the screen showing me the life I was funding but was not allowed to be a part of. This house, this beautiful house in Maple Creek, Oregon, was bought with Robert's money and my name on the deed. The car they drove, the clothes they wore, the gilded spoon they were dining at, it was all subsidized by the pension and investments Robert and I had painstakingly built over 45 years of hard work. I was the ghost in the machine, the silent benefactor to a family who saw me not as a mother, but as a bank vault with a slowly ticking timer. 2 years. 2 years since I had buried my husband. A month after the funeral, I had my minor stroke. It was a masterpiece of an act, choreographed with a precision that would have made the local theater group proud. A slight slur in my speech, a manufactured weakness on my left side, a carefully feigned confusion. The doctors were puzzled, the tests inconclusive, but with a family so eager to believe the worst, it didn't take much to convince them. The wheelchair became my throne and my observation post. From it I would watch them. I would listen. And I would test the final desperate hope Robert and I had concocted in his last months. A hope that our son, our only child, was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the layers of greed and entitlement. Watching their smiling faces on my phone that night, in the crushing silence of my own birthday, I understood. Hope was a luxury I could no longer afford. They weren't just neglectful. They were actively, happily erasing me. And as I sat there, I wasn't sad. The sadness had burned out long ago, leaving behind a cold, clear and focused purpose. They thought the woman in the wheelchair was weak, her mind and body failing. They had no idea she was a judge. And the jury was about to come back with a verdict that I wasn't always this woman in a chair. It's strange, the things you have time to remember when the world believes your mind and body have betrayed you. The silence of this house, once filled with the bustling energy of a life fully lived, is now a vast canvas, and on it my memory paints in vivid color. Before the quiet hum of these wheels became the soundtrack to my days, my footsteps echoed with purpose on the polished floors of St. Jude's Hospital. For 35 years I was Stella the head nurse. Not just a name, but a title earned through double shifts, missed holidays and hands that were firm but gentle, skilled in everything from setting a bone to soothing a terrified child. I remember the crisp, starched white of my uniform, a suit of armor I wore with pride. There was a certain authority in the squeak of my orthopedic shoes on the linoleum, a rhythm of competence and control. I managed a staff of 50, orchestrated the chaotic symphony of an emergency ward, and made decisions in a heartbeat that would alter the course of a person's life. Doctors, brilliant but often flustered, would look to me in a crisis and ask, "Stella, what do we do?" And I always had an answer. I was a problem solver, a manager, a steady hand in the storm. My life was defined by my strength, my resilience. I was the person people leaned on. And I carried that role home with me. My Robert, my dear kind Robert, he used to joke about it. He'd come home from his engineering firm, smelling of sawdust and graphite, and find me organizing the pantry with the same precision I used for the hospital's medical supplies. He'd wrap his arms around my waist, rest his chin on my shoulder and whisper, "Still running the world, Nurse Stella?" I would lean back into his warmth, the one place I ever truly felt I could rest, and I'd just smile. He understood. He saw that my need to care, to fix, to provide was woven into the very fiber of my being. He also saw the potential for it to be my undoing. I remember one evening years ago when our son David was just a teenager, full of wild dreams and a charming smile that could talk his way out of any trouble. Robert and I were sitting on the porch swing, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle, watching the fireflies dance. I was telling him how I'd paid for David's entire class trip to Washington, D.C., even though he'd lost the money we'd given him. I saw it as just another problem to solve. But Robert took my hand, his callous palm warm against mine, and his expression was serious. "Your kindness is your strength, Stella," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But they see it as a weakness." I didn't understand who they were at the time. I just thought he was talking about the world in general. I never imagined he might one day be talking about our own son. When David came to us with his idea for a tech startup, his eyes were blazing with the kind of passion I hadn't seen in him since he was a boy building model rockets in the garage. He had charts and projections, a slick presentation about an app that would revolutionize something. I honestly can't even remember what. All I saw was my son, on the cusp of his own life, asking for a foundation to build upon. All I heard was the echo of my own purpose: to help, to support, to nurture. So when he asked for our help, there was no hesitation. Robert was more cautious, but he saw the hope in my eyes and he loved me for it. So we gave. I poured my life savings, every penny I had set aside from decades of grueling work, into his dream. I signed the papers at the bank, my signature clear and steady, the same one that had co-signed on life-saving procedures. This felt no different. It was an investment in a life. In my son's life. The startup failed within a year. The money was gone. David was devastated, but I held him and told him it was okay. That failure was just a part of the journey. A few years later, when he and Sarah wanted to buy a house, this house they couldn't get approved for a mortgage. Their credit was a mess. Once again they came to me. To us. Just for a few years, Mom, David had promised, his arm around a pregnant Sarah. Until we get back on our feet. And once again my pen met paper. I co-signed the mortgage on this very house. A fact they've conveniently forgotten. A truth buried under years of perceived entitlement. I didn't see it as a financial transaction. I saw it as building a nest for my first grandchild. A home where our family could grow. But Robert saw things I didn't. In his final years, as the illness began to steal his strength, his mind became sharper, more observant. He saw the subtle shifts. He noticed how David and Sarah's visits became less about sitting with him, and more about casual questions about his will. He saw how their eyes would scan the room, lingering on his grandfather's clock or the paintings we'd collected over a lifetime. They weren't seeing memories, they were seeing a future inventory. It was in those last few months, in the quiet, sterile room that had become his world, that the seed of this plan was planted. "They're waiting, Stella," he whispered to me one night, his breath rattling in his chest. "They're not waiting for me to get better. They're just waiting." The pain of that realization was a physical thing. It was sharper than any grief I had yet known. This wasn't some abstract failing of character. It was a deep personal betrayal aimed at the heart of our family. So, with what little time he had left, we crafted a defense. Not of our assets but of our dignity. We met with his lawyer, Mr. Harrison, a man of quiet integrity who had been Robert's friend for 40 years. Together, the three of us laid the groundwork for this elaborate, painful charade. The stroke wasn't a tragedy that befell me. It was a strategy one deployed. It was a meticulously planned deception. A final test designed by a dying husband to see if there was any love left in his son's heart, and executed by a grieving widow to find the truth. The day I first sat in this wheelchair, it wasn't a surrender. It was the day I went to war. And now, 2 years into this self-imposed exile, the stage is set and the actors are playing their parts perfectly. David and his wife Sarah control my finances, a power they seized with performative concern, citing my fragile state. They went to the bank with carefully worded documents from a doctor they'd found, a man easily persuaded by their tale of a poor, confused old woman. They now give me a meager allowance doled out every Friday morning in a small white envelope. $200 a week. From my own pension, from the Social Security I earned over a lifetime of labor. It's a pittance meant to keep me quiet, to sustain my body but starve my spirit. I watch Sarah do her online shopping, boxes from expensive boutiques arriving at the door almost daily. I see the receipts for fancy dinners left on the kitchen counter. I smell the expensive steaks they grill in the backyard, while I eat my lukewarm bowl of canned soup. They buy me the cheapest food, the bland, processed meals meant for institutions, telling me it's easier on my digestion. They cover me with the thinnest blankets, scratchy polyester things from a discount store, while their own beds are piled high with plush duvets. I am a line item on their budget, an expense to be minimized. I am a burden they tolerate because they believe this house, and Robert's sizable estate, will be theirs the moment my heart stops beating. They talk about it when they think I'm asleep, their voices low whispers carrying through the thin walls. They discuss rising property values, kitchen remodels, and where they'll go on vacation once the probate is settled. They are living a lie, A grand performance of filial duty for the neighbors and the occasional distant relative who calls. They tell everyone how hard it is, caring for an invalid. They sigh with theatrical weariness, collecting sympathy like currency. But in the privacy of these walls there is no care. There is only waiting. They are vultures circling, and they don't realize that the meal they're waiting for is watching them right back. They think I am a victim, a helpless old woman fading away in a corner. They are wrong. I am the architect of this sorrow. I built this stage. I wrote the opening act. And I am waiting with the patience of a predator for them to deliver their final damning lines. Every cold meal, every condescending pat on the head, every whispered conversation about my impending death is another brick in the wall of their own prison. And I, the silent woman in the wheelchair, am holding the key. The days bled into one another, each a fresh page in a book of quiet cruelties. The house, once filled with the warmth of Robert's laughter and the smell of my baking, had become a sterile stage for my family's performance of neglect. Dinner was the centerpiece of this daily theater. The dining room table, a solid oak piece Robert and I had chosen together on our 20th anniversary, was a landscape of stark contrasts. On one end, David, Sarah, and Leo sat on their high-backed chairs, the clinking of their heavy silverware against fine china a mocking symphony. The scent of seared steak or roasted chicken would fill the air, a rich, savory cloud that never quite reached my corner. I was not seated at the table with them. I was positioned near the doorway, an island of isolation. They said it was for easy access, in case I needed to be wheeled away. But I knew the truth. I was an unsightly piece of furniture, a reminder of a mortality they didn't want to contemplate over their Merlot. My meals were served on a chipped blue plastic plate, the kind you buy for toddlers. My fork was plastic, flimsy and prone to snapping if I applied too much pressure. My food was whatever was left from the night before, scraped from a container and briefly warmed in the microwave, leaving it lukewarm and rubbery. Tonight, it was a congealed lump of what might have once been shepherd's pie. As David carved into his thick, juicy ribeye, the sound grating against my nerves, Sarah waved a hand in front of her face. "David, darling," she said, her voice a high nasal whine that always seemed to carry a complaint. "Can we please do something about the smell? It's wafting all the way from over there." She didn't look at me, but gestured vaguely in my direction with her fork. "It's that old person smell. Like mothballs and expired medicine. It's really putting me off my dinner." David, my son, my only child, didn't even flinch. He just chewed his mouthful of steak, swallowed, and took a sip of wine. "We can light a candle, Sarah," he mumbled, his eyes fixed on his plate. He wouldn't meet my gaze. He hadn't truly looked at me in months. It was easier for him to see the wheelchair, the slumped posture, the vacant expression I had perfected, than to see his own mother. Leo, my grandson, snickered into his phone. He was always on that device, his face illuminated by its cold blue light. "It's probably Grandma's diaper," he said loudly, not bothering to lower his voice. "Maybe she needs a change." Sarah shot him a look that wasn't one of reprimand, but of shared amusement. "Leo, be nice," she said, a smirk playing on her lips. "Your grandmother can't help it." The words were a twisted mockery of kindness, each one a perfectly aimed dart. I remained silent, my face a mask of placid indifference. Inside, a cold, hard knot was tightening in my stomach. This was the fuel. Every insult, every look of disgust, was another log on the fire of my resolve. One evening, the casual cruelty escalated into a public spectacle. Leo had a can of soda in his hand, his eyes glued to his phone which was propped up on the table. He was live-streaming, talking to a faceless audience of online friends. He stood up, stretching theatrically. "Whoops," he said, his voice dripping with false surprise. He stumbled as if losing his balance, and the entire can of sticky, cold cola cascaded down my front, soaking my cardigan and the thin blanket covering my legs. The cold shock was instant, a gasp escaping my lips before I could stop it. The syrupy liquid seeped through my clothes, chilling my skin. I began to shiver, my hands, which I was supposed to have little control over, instinctively trying to brush the mess away. But the fake frailty I had cultivated for 2 years took over. My movements were clumsy, ineffective, only spreading the sticky mess further. Leo had his phone pointed directly at me. "Oh man guys, total fail," he said to his stream, a grin spreading across his face. "Look at this mess. Grandma's getting a bath tonight, I guess." Through the screen of his phone, I could see little emojis popping up in the chat. Laughing faces, crying with laughter faces, little icons of applause. Strangers miles away were finding humor in my humiliation. Sarah didn't get up to help. She just sighed, a long dramatic sound of utter inconvenience. "Leo, for God's sake. Now I have to clean that. You know how that smell gets into the upholstery." David finally looked up, a flicker of something, annoyance? Shame? In his eyes before it was extinguished. "Get a towel, son," was all he said before returning to his food. No one came to help me. No one offered a kind word. I sat there shivering and sticky, a prop in my grandson's quest for online validation, while the digital laughter of his friends echoed in the silent dining room. That night, as I painstakingly cleaned myself in the cold bathroom, I felt the fire inside me burn hotter, turning the pain into something sharp and focused, like a shard of glass. The nights were the worst. The house would fall silent, but my mind would race. The silence, however, was a lie. And I had the proof. A few months into my performance, I had asked Mr. Harrison to procure a small, discreet audio recorder. It was disguised as a charger for a hearing aid, a device I didn't actually need but pretended to wear. Each evening after Sarah had briskly wheeled me into my room and shut the door with a decisive click, I would place the charger on my bedside table, its tiny microphone pointed towards the wall I shared with their master bedroom. Then I would wait. In the darkness, with only the sliver of light from under the door, I would put on a pair of small earbuds and listen to the truth. Their voices, muffled by the wall but crystal clear through the sensitive microphone, were my nightly poison. "Did you see her face when Leo spilled the soda?" Sarah's voice, stripped of its daytime pretense, was sharp and ugly. She looked like a drowned rat. I almost died laughing. David's reply was a low murmur. "You shouldn't encourage him, Sarah. What if she'd had a real shock?" "Oh please," she scoffed. "What's the worst that could happen? Another stroke? Might be a blessing, honestly. Think about it, David. The real estate market is on fire right now. Henderson down the street just sold his place for $2.5 million. 2.5. And our house is bigger. Better lot too." There was a pause. I held my breath, my heart thumping against my ribs. I prayed with a desperation that shamed me, for my son to defend me, to say something, anything, to push back against her venomous greed. "I know," he finally said, his voice heavy with resignation, not resistance. "I saw the listing. It's crazy what these places are going for." "Exactly," Sarah pressed on, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "So how long do you think she'll hang on? Dr. Miller said it could be years." "Years, David. By then the market could crash. We could lose millions. All that money just sitting here while she drools in a chair." They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were annoyed that I was taking so long. Every breath I took was an inconvenience, a delay in their financial windfall. They were calculating my death like an investment portfolio, impatient for their returns. I would lie in bed, the earbuds feeding their casual cruelty directly into my brain, and feel a part of myself wither and die. The love I had for my son was being hollowed out, night after night, leaving behind a brittle, empty shell. The recordings were saved on a tiny memory card, a growing library of their greed. Each file was a nail in the coffin they were so eager to build for me. Their impatience soon manifested in a more direct assault. One afternoon, David came into my room, his demeanor unnervously cheerful. He was holding a stack of papers and a pen. Sarah hovered in the doorway, a hawk watching its prey. "Hey, Mom," David said, his voice oozing a synthetic warmth that set my teeth on edge. "Got some papers here from the doctor's office. Just some routine medical consent forms. With your condition, they need to have a clearer line of authority for decisions. Just a formality." He placed a clipboard on my lap, the pages filled with dense legal text. He pointed to a line at the bottom of the last page. "Just need your signature right there." I didn't need to read the whole thing. My mind, the one they believed was addled and slow, scanned the document in seconds. Key phrases leaped out at me. Full power of attorney, unrestricted access to all financial accounts, sole authority over property and assets. This wasn't a medical consent form. This was a complete and total surrender. This was them trying to legally steal everything Robert and I had ever worked for right under my nose. My heart hammered in my chest. This was the first major test. One slip, one moment of panic, and it would all be over. I had to play my part perfectly. I looked up at him, my eyes wide and confused, the expression of a lost old woman I had practiced in the mirror 100 times. What is it, dear? I slurred my words slightly. Just papers, Mom. For the doctors, he said, his smile tightening at the edges. Here, let me help you with the pen. He placed the pen in my hand, his fingers closing over mine. His touch was cold, impatient. I let my hand tremble, a violent, palsy-like tremor that I summoned from the depths of my rage. The tremor was an old friend of actors and liars, and I was now both. I let my whole arm shake, my breath coming in short, staged gasps. I can't, I whispered, my voice frail. My hand. It won't stop shaking. Just try, Mom, Sarah urged from the doorway, her voice sharp with frustration. It's not that hard. Just make a mark. I lowered the pen to the paper. I let it hover over the signature line for a long, agonizing moment. I could feel David's frustration radiating off him. Then I let it drop. I didn't try to form letters. I dragged the nib across the line, a spidery, uncontrolled smear of black ink that looked more like an inkblot test than a name. It was completely, utterly illegible. A useless smudge. I looked up, my eyes filling with manufactured tears of frustration. I'm sorry, I whimpered. I'm so sorry, David. I can't. David snatched the clipboard from my lap. He stared at the ruined signature. His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. The cheerful mask was gone, replaced by a flash of pure, undisguised fury. He didn't say a word. He just turned and stormed out of the room, Sarah trailing behind him, shooting me a look of pure venom. As their footsteps faded down the hall, I let my hand relax. It was perfectly steady. A small cold smile touched my lips. It was a victory, but a terrifying one. I had blocked their move, but in doing so, I had shown them a barrier. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, they would not try to go around it next time. They would try to smash right through it. Their patience was gone. The game was entering a new, more dangerous phase. The silence in this house had a texture. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of an empty home. It was the thick, waiting silence of a held breath. It was the silence of the hunter, and I, the supposedly helpless prey, was the one holding the bow. Every creak of the floorboards above, every murmur of the television from the living room, was a sound I catalogued and analyzed. For 2 years my world had shrunk to the space between these 4 walls, and my senses had sharpened to a razor's edge. I could tell by the cadence of his footsteps if David was irritated or pleased. I knew the high, artificial pitch Sarah used on the phone when she was complaining about me to one of her friends. I knew the sound of Leo's thumbs tapping on his phone, a frantic, tiny rhythm of disrespect. They thought my mind was as crippled as my body, a slow, fading thing. They were so very wrong. The day Mr. Harrison was scheduled to visit felt different. The air was charged, heavy with a humidity that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the Tuesday of the 3rd week of the month, our standing appointment. Usually, David and Sarah were out by this time, David at his consulting job that produced no income, and Sarah at one of her luncheons. But today they were home. A wrench in the works. My heart, a steady, patient drum, picked up its tempo. I had rolled myself to the window of my downstairs room, the one they'd so graciously converted from Robert's old study. I could see the street, a sliver of the world I was no longer a part of. I was watching for his car, a modest gray sedan that never drew attention. My greatest obstacle was my isolation. They controlled the phone, screening my calls. They opened my mail. Contacting Mr. Harrison had been a feat of clandestine maneuvering that would have made a spy proud. I'd used a prepaid burner phone, bought for me by a sympathetic grocery delivery boy I'd overtipped for months, to arrange these meetings. But he still had to come to the front door. He still had to get past them. The internal battle was a constant, grinding war. Every time I looked at David, I saw the little boy who used to fall asleep in my arms, his chubby fingers curled around mine. The guilt was a physical thing, a cold stone in my gut. Was this justice, or was it a monstrous, unforgivable act of maternal betrayal? I was setting a trap for my own son. I was praying for him to fail, to reveal the rot in his soul, and the thought made me feel unclean. I remembered a mistake I'd made years ago, a colossal error in judgment. When David's first tech startup was failing, I had poured my and Robert's retirement savings into it, believing in his dream. I'd co-signed the mortgage on this very house to give him the collateral he needed. I had enabled him. Was his greed my fault? Had my love been a poison that created the man he was today? The fear that I was the architect of my own misery was a constant torment. Then I'd hear Sarah's laugh, a sound like breaking glass, and my resolve would harden again. I'd see the charge on the credit card statement, the one I'd painstakingly fished out of the trash, for a $500 dinner for two. On the same day they'd given me a bowl of cold soup because cooking for me was too much of a hassle. And the guilt would recede, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. The doorbell chimed, a sharp electric sound that sliced through the house. I heard David's heavy sigh from the living room. Probably another one of those solar panel clowns, he grumbled. Just get rid of them, Dave, Sarah's voice followed, bored and dismissive. I held my breath, my knuckles white on the arms of my wheelchair. I could hear the front door open. Can I help you? David's voice was instantly hostile, the tone he used for people he considered beneath him. Good morning, a calm, firm voice replied. It was him. Mr. Harrison. I'm Arthur Harrison. I have a 10 o'clock appointment with Mrs. Stella Miller. There was a beat of silence. I could picture the look on David's face, the confused, suspicious narrowing of his eyes. My mother? She doesn't have any appointments. She's unwell. I handle all her affairs. I assure you our appointment is long-standing, Mr. Harrison said, his voice unwavering. It was the voice of a man accustomed to dealing with difficult people. It is a private legal matter. Now if you'll please let me in. Legal? I heard Sarah's sharp voice now as she joined David at the door. What kind of legal matter? Who are you? As I said, I am Arthur Harrison. I was your father's attorney, David. And I am the executor of his estate. I am here for my monthly meeting with my client, Stella. The mention of the estate was a calculated move. It was the magic word, the key that unlocked their interest if not their courtesy. Their greed was my only leverage. The estate. David's tone shifted slightly, a flicker of avarice cutting through the annoyance. Well, why didn't you say so? I didn't recognize you. Come in, come in. I let out the breath I was holding in a slow, silent stream. He was in. The first hurdle was cleared. I heard their footsteps in the hall, their voices a low murmur. She's in the study, David said. Frankly, I'm not sure what you could possibly need to discuss. Her memory is shot. Most days she barely knows what's going on. I will be the judge of that, Mr. Harrison replied coolly. I require privacy for this meeting. The door to my room opened. David stood there, filling the frame, a forced oily smile on his face. Sarah hovered behind him, her eyes darting around my room, as if looking for hidden valuables. Mom, you have a visitor, David said, his voice dripping with condescension. Mr. Harrison, Dad's old lawyer. He says you have an appointment. He made air quotes with his fingers. I looked past him at the man in the impeccably tailored gray suit. Arthur Harrison was in his late 60s, the same age as me, with a full head of silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He had been Robert's friend long before he was his lawyer. He was my only link to the outside world, my co-conspirator. He gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Stella, it's good to see you. David, Sarah, if you would be so kind as to close the door on your way out, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. They hesitated, clearly wanting to stay and listen. But something in Mr. Harrison's demeanor, a quiet, unshakable authority, made them comply. David gave me one last, suspicious look before pulling the door shut. The click of the latch was the sweetest sound I had heard all day. "Are we clear?" Mr. Harrison asked, his voice low. I nodded, my throat tight. I couldn't risk speaking much. The house had ears, and they might be listening at the door. I pointed a trembling finger towards a small bookshelf. On the second shelf, tucked behind a thick volume of Shakespeare, was a small state-of-the-art sound-dampening device he had given me. He retrieved it and placed it on the desk, activating it with a soft click. A faint hum filled the room, a shield of white noise that would muddle any conversation to the outside ear. Only then did I feel I could truly breathe. "The past month?" he asked, pulling a chair from the corner and sitting opposite me. I didn't answer verbally. Instead, I reached under the cushion of my wheelchair. My fingers found the small velvet pouch. Inside was a micro-SD card. The process of retrieving it, of swapping it with a blank one, was a terrifying ritual. My hands, which I had to pretend were weak and palsied, had to become nimble and quick in the dead of night. One slip, one moment of discovery, and the entire plan would crumble. I held it out to him. This tiny piece of plastic was my life's work for the past 30 days. It held all their venom, all their greed, all their casual cruelty, distilled into bits and bytes. He took it and inserted it into a slim tablet he pulled from his briefcase. We didn't speak as he put in a set of earbuds. I watched his face, his expression remaining neutral, professional, but his jaw tightening as he navigated the files. He listened to the audio recordings first. I knew what he was hearing. Sarah on the phone, laughing about how she'd accidentally spilled my tea because I was taking too long to drink it. David discussing with her how much the house would fetch on the market once I was out of the picture. Leo bragging to his friends online about the pranks he pulled on his demented old grandma. Then he switched to the video files. I had downloaded them from Leo's social media accounts using the library computer on my one supervised outing per month. He watched the clip of Leo switching my salt shaker with sugar, my face contorting in disgust as I sipped my soup. He watched the one where Leo had hidden my reading glasses, filming me as I patted the blankets around me in confused frustration. Each one was a small, sharp stab to my heart, but to Mr. Harrison they were exhibits. A B and C in the case against my family. Finally, he reviewed the documents. I had painstakingly retrieved credit card statements from the shredder bin, piecing them back together like a grim jigsaw puzzle. He scrolled through the images, his eyes taking in the charges for designer clothes, expensive electronics, weekend getaways to Napa. All paid for from my pension and Robert's survivor benefits, which were direct deposited into an account David had sole control over. He finally removed the earbuds, his face grim. "The evidence is overwhelming, Stella. Their cruelty is methodical." He paused, looking at me with deep concern. "But are you certain about this path? The legal challenge will be straightforward. But the personal one? This will burn everything to the ground. There is no coming back from this." His question was a test. He was not just my lawyer. He was my friend, worried for my soul. He was offering me an out, a chance to reconsider the devastating finality of what we were about to do. For a moment, the image of David as a child flashed in my mind again. His small hand in mine. The memory was so vivid it hurt. My resolve wavered. Was any victory worth the price of my only child? The internal battle raged. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and shameful. Was I strong enough? I took a shaky breath and nodded, a single firm dip of my chin. The time for doubt was over. The woman who had cried was the mother. The woman who nodded was the executioner. "Good," he said, his voice softening with respect. "Then let's review the instruments of their destruction. It's time you were reminded of the power you truly hold." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. "As we discussed when we first set this plan in motion with Robert, this is not a simple will. Robert was a brilliant man, Stella. And he was a man who saw the truth long before you or I were willing to accept it." He opened the folder. "Let's start with the house. David and Sarah believe it will pass to David upon your death. They are operating under the assumption that they are simply waiting you out. They are fools. He slid a document across the small table between us. The property was placed in the Robert Miller Family Trust 5 years ago. It is not in your name nor David's. It is an independent legal entity. He tapped a line on the page. And here is the crucial part. You, Stella Miller, are named the sole trustee. Not a beneficiary. The trustee. You have the absolute and unilateral power to manage, mortgage, sell, or dissolve the trust at your discretion, at any time for any reason. You are not a tenant in this house, Stella. You are its queen, and they are merely courtiers who have forgotten their place. The words washed over me. A bomb on a burn I hadn't realized was so deep. For 2 years I had felt like a prisoner. To know that the keys to the kingdom had been in my pocket the entire time was a staggering realization. But the true masterpiece, Mr. Harrison continued, his voice low and intense, the part Robert was most proud of, is in his last will and testament. He flipped to another section of the folder. It concerns David's inheritance, the liquid assets, the investment portfolio, everything besides the house. He pointed to a specific paragraph. Clause 5.1. We called it the morality mandate. I've never seen another one like it. It stipulates that David is to inherit the full remainder of the estate on one condition, and one condition only. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine. That he provides, and I quote, dignified, compassionate, and familial care for his mother, you in her golden years. He let the words hang in the air. And who is the sole arbiter of what constitutes dignified, compassionate, and familial care? He smiled a thin, grim line. The executor of the estate, based on any and all evidence he deems relevant. Me. He gestured to the tablet containing the SD card. They thought they were writing their future prosperity. Instead, with every cruel word, with every humiliating video, with every stolen dollar, they have been writing their own disinheritance. A profound sense of awe at my late husband's foresight filled me. Robert had always been the pragmatist while I was the emotional one. He had seen the cracks in David's character that I had papered over with a mother's love. He had built this fortress around me before he left, a final fierce act of protection. But there was one more thing. Mr. Harrison's expression shifted, the professional mask giving way to one of genuine sadness. Stella, there's something else. Something Robert debated whether to share with you. He left it to my discretion, and I believe you need to know now. It will hurt, but it will also give you the strength to see this through to the end. He reached into an inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with wax, bearing Robert's signet ring. My name was written on the front in his familiar, elegant script. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't seen his handwriting in years. He wrote this in the last month of his life, Mr. Harrison said softly. He told me it was a confession. My hand trembled as I took the envelope. The paper felt heavy, weighted with unspoken words. The wax seal cracked under my thumbnail with a sound that seemed to echo in the silent room. I unfolded the letter. The scent of my husband's old study, of cedar and old books, seemed to rise from the page. And I began to read. My dearest Stella, it began. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and our fears about David have come to pass. I pray that is not the case, but my heart tells me I must prepare for it. There are things you do not know, burdens I carried alone to protect you. I see now that my silence was a mistake. It was not protection. It was a lie of omission that allowed a sickness to fester. The letter went on to detail the final catastrophic failure of David's business venture. The one I had poured our life savings into. But the story I knew was a lie. The business hadn't failed because of market conditions or bad luck. It had failed because David had been embezzling from his own company. He had been siphoning funds for years, desperately trying to hide a secret that was far uglier than a simple business failure. The money wasn't for him, Stella, Robert wrote. It was for Sarah. Our daughter-in-law, the woman we welcomed into our family, has a gambling addiction. A severe one. The debts were astronomical. David wasn't just trying to save his business, he was trying to pay off loan sharks. When the company money ran out, he came to me. He confessed everything. He had stolen from us, Stella. Not just the investment you made, but he had forged my signature on loan documents, liquidated a stock portfolio I had set aside for Leo's college. He stole from his own son's future to pay for his wife's sins. The words on the page swam before my eyes. A cold dread, far deeper than anything I had felt before, seeped into my bones. This wasn't just about greed. This was about a level of deceit I couldn't fathom. I made a choice, the letter continued. A weak one. I paid the debts. I covered his tracks. I did it to avoid a scandal, to protect the family name, to protect you from this heartbreak. It was the greatest mistake of my life. My silence didn't fix him. It taught him he could get away with anything. It showed him that his father, and by extension his mother, was a bank to be robbed, not a family to be cherished. This test, this terrible, painful plan with the will and the trust. It is my penance. It is my last desperate attempt to correct a wrong I helped create. I am not testing David's greed, my love. I am testing if there is any piece of the boy we raised left inside the man he has become. The letter ended, but I kept staring at the page, at the final shaky signature. All my love, forever, Robert. The knife of their betrayal had been lodged in my back for 2 years. This letter did not remove it. It twisted it, driving it deeper, shattering bone and spirit. My son wasn't just weak and greedy. He was a thief, a liar. He had stood by and watched his father cover for him, and then after his father was gone, he had turned the same predatory eyes on me. Sarah wasn't just a spoiled, unpleasant woman. She was a vortex of destruction, and my son had sacrificed his own integrity to feed her habit. A single dry sob escaped my lips. It was not a sound of weakness, but of profound, bottomless sorrow. The family I thought I was fighting for was a phantom. It had died years ago, in a series of secret transactions and hushed-up crimes. I hadn't been a fool for 2 years. I had been a fool for a decade. Mr. Harrison watched me, his expression full of a sorrowful understanding. He didn't speak. He simply waited. I carefully, deliberately folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I tucked it into the pocket of my cardigan, where it rested against my heart. It felt like a shard of ice. The guilt I had felt, the maternal conflict, it all evaporated, burned away by the cold fire of this final truth. The last obstacle, my own heart, had been obliterated. My plan had never been about the money or the house. It was about respect, about dignity. Now it was about something more. It was about honoring Robert. It was about finishing the last terrible piece of business he had left undone. I looked up at Mr. Harrison. The tears were gone. My eyes were clear and hard. I was no longer a victim waiting for justice. I was the instrument of a dead man's will. And I would not fail him again. The knowledge of David's old betrayal, the secret Robert had carried to his grave, didn't just add fuel to the fire. It changed the very nature of the flame. It was no longer a hot, roaring blaze of anger. It became a cold, blue focus point of heat, the kind that can cut through steel. The money Sarah had gambled away, the money David had stolen from his own father to cover it up, it wasn't just about greed anymore. It was about a fundamental rottenness that had taken root years ago. My performance, which had been born of desperation and a need for justice, now became an instrument of righteous reckoning. I was no longer just an actress in my own home. I was the architect of their downfall, and every feigned tremble, every vacant stare, was another brick in the prison I was building around them. I let my shoulders slump a little more. I started leaving my sentences unfinished, trailing off as if the thought had escaped me like a wisp of smoke. When Sarah spoke to me, I'd wait a few extra beats before turning my head, my eyes blinking slowly as if surfacing from a deep fog. I became a master of the subtle art of decay. The day after Mr. Harrison's visit, I let a fork slip from my grasp at breakfast, clattering onto the tile floor. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Mom," David sighed, not looking up from his phone. "Try to keep a grip." Sarah made its sking sound, a noise like a leaky faucet of disdain. "I'll get it. Don't you move a muscle, Stella. Wouldn't want you to strain yourself." The sarcasm was a thick, syrupy poison. I just looked down at the fork, a single tear welling in my eye, a perfect crystalline prop. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice a frail, papery thing. "My hands, they just don't listen to me today." They exchanged a look over my head. It was a look of shared victory, of smug confirmation. "She's fading. It won't be long now." It was exactly the look I wanted to see. The more fragile I appeared, the more reckless they became. My greatest performance came a few days later. I knew they were often in the living room when I made my scheduled weekly call to Mr. Harrison. Before, I had been careful, speaking in low tones. This time I wheeled myself into the hallway, just outside the living room doorway, where they couldn't see me but could hear every word perfectly. I dialed his number. "Mr. Harrison," I began, my voice deliberately louder, shakier. "It's Stella. Stella Vance." I could hear the rustle of a magazine stopping in the other room. They were listening. "Yes, Stella, how are you?" Harrison's voice was warm, professional. He was a good actor, too. "Oh, I'm here," I said, a masterpiece of vague confusion. "I wanted to ask you about the papers. The ones Robert left. There were so many of them. The trust documents? Everything is in order, Stella. Just as we discussed." "Yes, the trust," I said, letting my voice crack. "It's just my memory, Harold. It's not what it used to be. I thought I was reading it, but the words, they get all jumbled. Did he make sure David was taken care of? I worry so much about him. Is he the beneficiary?" I could almost feel the air in the living room thicken with their greed. This was the question they were desperate to have answered. Mr. Harrison played his part perfectly. "Stella, we've been over this. David is well provided for in the event of your passing. The estate is structured to transfer to him. You don't need to worry about a single thing. Just focus on your health." "Oh, good." I sighed, a long, wavering exhalation of relief. "That's good. I forget things. I had this terrible thought that I'd done something wrong. Signed the wrong paper. Thank you, Harold. You've put an old woman's mind at ease." I hung up the phone and let my head fall forward, resting my forehead against my hands in a posture of utter exhaustion. I stayed there for a full minute before slowly wheeling myself back to my room. I didn't need to see them to know what was happening. I could picture Sarah's triumphant, sharp-toothed smile, David's chest puffing out with entitled pride. They had heard it from the lawyer's own mouth. The prize was theirs for the taking. All they had to do was wait for the inconvenient old woman in the wheelchair to finally fade away. Their boldness became flagrant. The very next afternoon, I was parked in my usual spot by the window, pretending to watch the birds, when Sarah sat down at the dining room table with her laptop. She was humming a cheerful, tuneless sound that grated on my nerves. Then came the clicking, the rapid-fire tap-tap-tap of her long, acrylic nails on the keyboard. She wasn't trying to be quiet. She wanted me to hear. "Ooh, David, come look at this," she called out. David ambled in from the kitchen, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He leaned over her shoulder. "What's up?" "I just put a Make Me Move listing up on Zillow," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Just to test the waters, you know? See what the market value is. You will not believe the estimate they're giving us." My blood ran cold, but my face remained a placid, slack mask. I kept my eyes fixed on a blue jay in the oak tree outside, my breathing slow and even. Inside, my heart was a hammering drum. "Yeah." David's voice was low, conspiratorial. "How much?" "Guess." "I don't know, Sar." $750. She let out a delighted little squeal. "Try 925,000. And that's the low estimate. A bidding war could push it over $1 million. Can you imagine? $1 million. Holy." David breathed. "For this old place?" "It's not an old place, it's vintage charm in a prime location," she said, quoting the marketing jargon she'd no doubt been studying. "And with a few cosmetic updates, we could definitely get top dollar. I was thinking we knock out this wall, open up the kitchen in your mom's room. It gets the best afternoon light. It would make a fantastic home gym. We could put the treadmill right by the window." They were redecorating my life before I was even gone. They were standing in my home, the home Robert and I built with our own hands, with love and sacrifice, and they were auctioning off my memories to the highest bidder. The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of it was breathtaking. I felt the old, hot anger flare, but the cold blue flame of my resolve immediately extinguished it. Let them plan, I thought, my gaze steady on the blue jay. Let them build their castles in the sky. They have no idea the ground beneath them is about to open up and swallow them whole. This new, emboldened carelessness was a gift, but it also introduced new risks. My plan, so carefully constructed, was a delicate house of cards. A single unexpected gust of wind could bring it all down. That gust came in the form of my grandson Leo. It was a Tuesday, a day of suffocating stillness. Sarah and David were out, running errands that I knew, from their hushed conversations, involved meeting a financial advisor to discuss future asset management. I was in my room, reviewing the tiny printout of their latest credit card statement that Mr. Harrison had covertly mailed to a P.O. box I maintained. Another $1,000 at a high-end steakhouse, $500 at a designer boutique. My pension, my money being burned to fuel their fantasies. Suddenly my door flew open, banging against the wall. Leo stormed in, his face a mask of teenage fury. "Where is it?" he demanded, not even looking at me. He began yanking open my dresser drawers, tossing aside the neat piles of sweaters and blouses I could no longer wear. "Leo, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice holding the perfect note of startled fragility. "My vape," he snapped, his back to me. "The blue one. I know I left it in here yesterday when I came to get your laundry basket. Mom will kill me if she finds it." My heart seized. Not because of the vape, but because of where he was looking. His search was frantic, careless. He rummaged through my nightstand, knocking over a framed photo of me and Robert. He kicked at a pile of books. His eyes were scanning everywhere, a predator searching for its prey. And then his gaze drifted upward, up toward the ceiling, toward the unassuming white plastic circle of the smoke detector. The smoke detector with the pinhole camera lens at its center. He squinted. "What the? Is that a new smoke detector?" Time stopped. The air in the room became thick, unbreathable. My entire world, my entire plan, teetered on the edge of a cliff. He took a step toward the center of the room, craning his neck to get a better look. All my work, all the pain, the humiliation, the 2 years of this living death. It was all about to be for nothing. My mind screamed, "Do something. Now." My instincts, the instincts of a head nurse who had dealt with 1,000 crises, took over. My hand, the one that was supposed to be weak and uncoordinated, shot out. With a flick of my wrist, I knocked the tall glass of water from my bedside table. Didn't just tip over. It flew, hitting the hardwood floor with a startlingly loud crash. The glass exploded, sending water and shards scattering across the room. The noise was like a gunshot. Leo jumped, whirling around. "What the hell, Grandma?" "Oh!" I cried, my voice trembling with manufactured shock. I looked down at the mess, my eyes wide with fake horror. "Oh, my glass. I'm so sorry." I reached for it, and my hand, it just spasmed. I held up my hand and made it tremble violently. A convincing portrait of neuromuscular failure. Leo's focus on the smoke detector was completely broken. His irritation at my clumsiness overpowered his curiosity. "Seriously? Ugh, now I've got to clean this up." He glared at the broken glass, then at me, his face a mess of contempt and annoyance. "Just stay still so you don't roll through it." He stalked out of the room, grumbling about finding a dustpan, his search for the vape pen forgotten. The moment the door closed, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My body was slick with cold sweat. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. That was too close. Far, far too close. It was a stark reminder of how fragile this all was. How one unlucky moment could unravel everything. I looked down at my hand, the one that had so perfectly executed the diversion. It was steady as a rock. The fear was real, a cold knot tightening in my stomach, but as I looked at the doorway through which my grandson had just stormed, seeing the casual disdain on his face in my mind's eye, the fear receded. It was replaced by that cold, hard certainty. This had to end, and it had to end soon. The final thread began to unravel just 1 week later. The atmosphere in the house had become electric with a foul energy. David and Sarah were whispering constantly, huddled over documents at the kitchen table late at night, shutting their laptops with a guilty snap whenever I wheeled by. They were getting impatient. My continued existence was a frustrating logistical problem they were determined to solve. The call came on a Thursday morning. I was in the sunroom, the one place that still felt like mine, the light streaming in on the pots of geraniums Robert had loved. My secret cell phone, a simple prepaid flip phone, vibrated silently in the pocket of my cardigan. I glanced toward the house. The coast was clear. I answered. "Stella." Mr. Harrison's voice was grim. There were no pleasantries. "It's happened. They've made their move." "What is it, Harold?" I asked, my own voice low and steady. "They filed a petition with the county court," he said, the legal terms falling like stones. "A petition for conservatorship. They're seeking to have you declared legally incompetent." I closed my eyes. So this was it. The final, most profound betrayal. They didn't just want my house and my money. They wanted to strip me of my very identity, to legally erase the person I was and turn me into a non-entity, a ward of the state under their complete control. "On what grounds?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. "The petition is full of their fabricated evidence," Mr. Harrison continued, his voice tight with anger. "It cites your failing memory, your inability to manage your own affairs, your physical frailty. They mention you spilling things, your confusion during phone calls, Stella. They're using the very performance you've been giving against you." The irony was so bitter it felt like ash in my mouth. My own weapons were being turned against me. "Their lawyer has scheduled a hearing for next month," he went on. "I've already filed a motion to delay, citing a need for my own independent evaluation of your health. That will buy us some time, but not much. They are playing for keeps." I looked out at the garden, at the vibrant red of the geraniums. Everything seemed to come into sharp, painful focus. Robert's disappointed face in my memory, David's smug smile, Sarah's cruel laughter, Leo's contemptuous glare. 2 years of my life spent in this chair, in this silent, lonely war. It had all led to this moment. "Stella? Are you there?" Mr. Harrison's voice was laced with concern. "I'm here, Harold," I said, and my voice was no longer the voice of a week-old woman. It was clear and cold as ice. "It's time." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, "Yes, Stella. It is. They're making their final move. We must make ours." We both knew what that meant. The plan Robert and I had devised, the one we had refined with Mr. Harrison, had a final phase. It had a trigger. We had decided long ago that we needed an undeniable, publicly humiliating act of cruelty. Something so clear and vicious that no court could ignore it. A signal. "The wheelchair," I said softly. "The wheelchair," he confirmed. "When they feel they have finally broken you. When their arrogance makes them believe they are untouchable. That will be the moment." I hung up the phone. A strange calm settled over me. There was no more fear, no more doubt. The waiting was over. The game had reached its final move. I looked down at my legs, hidden beneath a woolen blanket. Legs that ached with the memory of long nursing shifts, of dancing with my husband, of running after my son in this very yard. Legs that had been still for 2 long years. Soon they would walk again. The breaking of my wheelchair, when it came, would not be the random, cruel act that began the end of my story. It was the carefully planned, perfectly timed signal that I had been waiting for all along. It was the starting gun for my resurrection. The impact sent a shockwave up my spine, a sickening jolt that was half real, half performance. Metal screamed against metal as the frame of my wheelchair buckled, twisted into a grotesque parody of what it had once been. I was thrown, not with violence, but with a clumsy, deliberate finality, onto the cold hardwood floor of the alcove they called my room. My cheek pressed against the dusty wood. The smell of lemon polish and neglect filling my nostrils. Above me, Leo stood with his phone, the little red light of the recording glowing like a demonic eye. His laughter was a high, cruel thing. the sound of a boy who had never known consequences. "And that's how you get rid of a squeaky wheel," he narrated for his audience, his voice filled with a manufactured bravado. He panned the phone down to my crumpled form, then back to his grinning face. Hashtag prank wars, hashtag epic fail, hashtag grandma got owned. From the living room I heard Sarah's shrill laugh, a sound like shattering glass. "Oh Leo, you're a menace. Did you get it?" David's deeper chuckle rumbled through the floorboards. "That's my boy. A future content creator." The phone in Leo's hand finally lowered. He looked down at me, not with remorse, but with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen. For a moment I thought he might offer a hand, a flicker of the grandson I once thought I knew. Instead he just shrugged. "Well, that's broken," he said, nudging the mangled chair with his foot. He turned and sauntered towards the sounds of his parents' approval, leaving me behind like so much discarded trash. I heard his footsteps fade, replaced by the murmur of their voices. I didn't move. I lay there listening, feeling the cold seep into my bones. This was it, the final piece of evidence, the one they had so gleefully provided themselves. 2 years. 2 years of feigned helplessness, of swallowing indignities, of playing the part of a frail, broken woman. Every cold meal, every whispered insult, every stolen dollar from my pension. It had all been a prelude to this single clarifying moment of cruelty. "He's got 100,000 views already," Sarah squealed from the kitchen. "People are loving it. They're calling him a savage." "We should celebrate," David said, his voice thick with pride. "I'll open that bottle of Merlot Robert was saving. The 98. Seems fitting." The sound of a cork popping was like a gunshot in the quiet house. A celebration. They were celebrating my humiliation. The wine Robert had bought for our 50th anniversary, an anniversary we never got to see. He had known even then. He had seen the greed festering in our son, the cold ambition in our daughter-in-law. "This isn't a will, Stella," he had told me, his voice weak but his eyes clear, as he signed the trust documents with Mr. Harrison. "It's a test, a last hope, and if it's a trap, I want you to be the one who springs it." I lay on the floor, my eyes closed, and let their voices wash over me. I was the trap, and they had just walked right into it. "To Leo," Sarah toasted, her voice close now, just around the corner in the kitchen. "And to the market," she added, a sly, avaricious edge to her tone. "Brenda from down the street said the Hendersons got 200,000 over asking. Can you imagine what this place would go for? Once we clear out all of this." The unspoken this was me. My things. My presence. My life. "Patience, honey," David cautioned, but there was no force behind it. "First things first. We'll get that power of attorney finalized next week. With this little accident," he chuckled, "it'll be even easier to prove she's not competent to manage her own affairs. Or this house." I heard the clink of their glasses, the soft slosh of wine being poured. They were mapping out the rest of my life and my death over a bottle of my dead husband's wine. I catalogued every word, every smug intonation, storing it in the vault of my memory alongside the audio files and the bank statements and the surreptitious photos. This wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about Robert's legacy. It was about the woman I used to be, the head nurse who could command an entire hospital wing with a single look, the woman who had raised a son she no longer recognized. "What about her?" Leo's voice suddenly a little less certain. "She's just lying there." "Let her," Sarah sneered, and the pure, unadulterated venom in her voice was a physical thing. "Let her think about what a nuisance she is. Maybe it'll finally sink in." The air grew thick with their smug triumph. They put on music, something jazzy and irritatingly cheerful. The aroma of their expensive cheese and charcuterie wafted from the kitchen, a stark contrast to the dust in my lungs. They were so confident, so wrapped up in their own cleverness, so certain of my powerlessness. They didn't hear the soft click of the front door opening. They didn't hear the whisper of expensive leather shoes on the foyer rug. But I did. Mr. Harrison was here. Right on time. The moment had arrived. The final scene of the play I had been directing for 2 years. I took a deep, steadying breath. It wasn't shaky. It wasn't the shallow breath of a frail old woman. It was the measured, controlled breath of a diver preparing to plunge into icy water. I let the air out slowly, feeling a cold resolve settle deep within me. The performance was over. My hands, which for 2 years had trembled with a palsy I did not have, flattened against the polished floorboards. The muscles in my arms, kept strong by secret late-night exercises, bunched and strained. I pushed. The floor was unyielding, but my body responded. I pushed myself up, first to my elbows, then to my hands and knees. The position of supplication felt wrong, a final fleeting moment of the role I was about to shed. My knees ached, a real ache this time, a protest from joints that had been held still for too long. I ignored it. I crawled silently out of the dim alcove and into the sliver of light spilling from the living room. Using the wall as leverage, I placed one foot flat on the floor, then the other. My legs trembled, not from weakness, but from a torrent of adrenaline. Slowly, vertebra by vertebra, I uncurled myself. I rose. Shaky at first, but with an undeniable burgeoning strength. I stood there for a moment in the shadows of the hallway, a specter in my own home, listening to the carefree chatter of my own flesh and blood as they plotted my demise. Then I took the first step. The heel of my slipper made a soft, definitive sound on the hardwood. Then another. I walked out of the shadows and into the bright, open space of the living room. The music was still playing. Sarah was laughing, her head thrown back, a full glass of deep red wine in her hand. David was leaning against the kitchen island, a smug smile on his face. Leo was glued to his phone again, scrolling through the comments on his viral video. It was Sarah who saw me first. Her laughter choked in her throat, cut off as if by a knife. Her eyes widened, the pupils shrinking to pinpricks of pure, unadulterated shock. Her hand went slack. The wine glass, a delicate crystal thing, fell from her fingers. It seemed to hang in the air for an eternity before it met the marble floor, shattering with a sound that was explosively loud in the suddenly silent room. Red wine bled across the white stone like a mortal wound. David's head snapped up at the sound. His smile vanished. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty white mask of disbelief. His mouth opened but no sound came out. He looked at me, then at the broken wheelchair in the alcove, then back at me, his mind refusing to process the impossible sight before him. Leo, annoyed by the interruption, looked up from his phone. His jaw didn't just drop. It hung open, a silent scream frozen on his lips. The phone slipped from his grasp and clattered onto the floor, the screen cracking. His eyes were wide, terrified, as if he were seeing a ghost. I let the silence stretch, letting their shock curdle into fear. I looked at each of them in turn, my gaze as cold and hard as a surgeon's scalpel. After 2 years of mumbling, of pretending my words were lost in a fog of confusion, my voice emerged. It was not weak. It was not frail. It was clear and cold as steel, honed to a razor's edge by 2 years of silent rage. "You were saying?" I asked. The question hung in the air, a declaration of war. Before any of them could find their voice, before they could piece together a lie or an excuse, another sound joined the tableau. The firm, confident footsteps of a man who owned any room he entered. At that exact moment, as if summoned by my words, Mr. Harrison walked in. He was not alone. Behind him, their presence filling the grand entryway, were 2 uniformed police officers. Their faces were impassive, their hands resting calmly on their belts. And with them, a stern-faced woman in a realtor's blazer, holding a clipboard like a shield. Mr. Harrison stopped beside me, a silent, unmovable pillar of support. He surveyed the scene, the shattered glass, the terrified family, and me standing tall and free. He didn't even glance at the broken wheelchair. His focus was entirely on my son. His voice, when he spoke, boomed in the suffocating silence, each word a nail in the coffin of their lives. David and Sarah Miller? David flinched as if he'd been struck. He could only manage a pathetic, strangled nod. "I am Martin Harrison, executor of the estate of Robert Miller," he announced, though they knew perfectly well who he was. This is a formal eviction notice. He gestured to the realtor, who took a crisp step forward. Per the terms of the Robert Miller Family Trust, which as of 5 minutes ago, is now officially and irrevocably dissolved, this property is to be vacated in 24 hours. Sarah let out a small strangled gasp. What? You can't. This is our home. Mr. Harrison ignored her completely. His cold eyes remained fixed on David. Furthermore, he said, and his voice dropped, becoming even more menacing, his gaze flicking for a moment towards the 2 police officers, we have compiled a substantial file of evidence. It details a consistent pattern of financial elder abuse, fraud, and theft against my client Stella Miller. He paused, letting the weight of the accusations land. The officers are here to take your statements. David stammered, his face a mess of confusion and panic. Evidence? What evidence? That's insane. She's not well. She doesn't know what she's saying. Mr. Harrison allowed himself a small, chilling smile. It didn't touch his eyes. He gestured towards Leo, who was still frozen in place, a statue of terrified boyhood. We have bank records, audio recordings, and several witness statements, he said calmly. But I have to thank your son. The video he just posted of him deliberately destroying Mrs. Miller's medical equipment and leaving her helpless on the floor will make an excellent Exhibit A. The silence that followed my first step was a physical thing. A glass wall shattering into a million invisible pieces. For a moment all that existed was the soft scuff of my slipper on the hardwood floor. A sound no one in this house had heard in 2 years. It was louder than a gunshot. David's fork, laden with a piece of steak he hadn't bothered to cut for me, clattered onto his plate. Sarah's wine glass froze halfway to her lips, her mouth a perfect silent O of disbelief. But it was Leo who broke me just for a second. His face, which had been twisted in a smirk of digital age cruelty, collapsed. The phone slipped from his hand, hitting the floor with a dull thud. In his eyes I saw not just shock but a terrifying dawning comprehension. The game was over. Then the chaos began, not as a roar but as a shriek. What is this? Sarah's voice was a nail on a chalkboard. What kind of sick trick is this? You've been faking? All this time. She stood up so fast her chair screeched back against the floor. You can't do this. We have rights. This is our home. I decorated this place. I chose the drapes. David, ever the follower, scrambled to his feet. His face was a mess of confusion and panic. Mom? What's going on? Mom, please sit down. You'll hurt yourself. He took a step toward me, his hand outstretched, not in comfort, but in a desperate attempt to shove the truth back into the box it had just escaped from. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him, and for the first time in a very long time he truly saw me. Not the frail invalid, not the inconvenient burden, but his mother. And he recoiled. That's when Mr. Harrison stepped through the front door, which he'd quietly opened moments before. He wasn't alone. 2 uniformed police officers flanked him, their expressions calm and unreadable. Behind them, a woman in a sharp blazer held a clipboard. The realtor. David. Sarah. Mr. Harrison's voice was calm, but it cut through Sarah's hysterics like a scalpel. I believe you know who I am. What is the meaning of this? David stammered, his eyes darting from me to the officers. You can't just barge in here. This is a private residence. Not anymore, it isn't, Mr. Harrison said, holding up a thick legal document. As of 5 minutes ago, upon verbal confirmation from my client Stella, the sole trustee, the Robert and Stella Vance Family Trust has been formally dissolved. As per the terms of the trust, which you were never privy to, this property is to be immediately liquidated. The woman with the clipboard stepped forward and with a chilling efficiency, began to methodically drive the stake of a for sale sign into the front lawn, the rhythmic thudding a death knell for the life they had built. No! Sarah screamed, a raw animal sound. She can't. She's not competent. We were just about to file the paperwork. She's senile, She is, in fact, one of the sharpest women I have ever had the pleasure of representing, Mr. Harrison countered smoothly. And as for paperwork, we have plenty of our own." He gestured to one of the officers who stepped forward. "Mr. David Vance, Mrs. Sarah Vance," the officer began, his voice a dispassionate monotone. "We have a warrant to collect evidence pertaining to an investigation into elder abuse, financial exploitation, and wire fraud." He held up a small clear bag. Inside was the audio recorder from my room. "We believe you'll find the recordings quite comprehensive. They include your discussions about wishing for Stella's premature death to capitalize on the housing market, your attempts to coerce her into signing over power of attorney, and numerous other incriminating conversations." David's face went from pale to ashen. He looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, desperate for a lie that could save him. But there were no more lies. I had taken them all away. "It's a misunderstanding," he finally choked out. "Mom, tell them. It's just a big misunderstanding. We were stressed. We love you." That pathetic, hollow declaration of love was the cruelest thing he had said in 2 years. Leo, who had been frozen this whole time, finally made a sound, a choked sob. The catastrophic weight of his prank had landed on him, crushing him. He wasn't just a boy who had been cruel to his grandmother. He was the one who had lit the fuse on the bomb that destroyed his entire world. He looked at the broken wheelchair, then at me standing tall, and his entire body shook with a shame so profound it was almost painful to watch. Their world, a gaudy palace built on a foundation of my money and their greed, didn't just crack. It vaporized. It crumbled into dust in the space of a single breath. I didn't stay to watch them sift through the rubble. There was no victory lap to be taken. As Sarah began to scream about lawyers and David continued to babble about misunderstandings, I turned. I walked past the life I had built, the photos on the wall of a family that was a fiction. I walked past my son, whose face was now the face of a stranger. I walked past my grandson, who was weeping for a life he had just thrown away for a few worthless internet likes. My gaze was fixed on the open front door, a rectangle of twilight and freedom. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel their stares burning into my back, but they had no more power over me. The air outside was cool and clean, and I breathed it in deeply, a long, slow breath that felt like it was my first. Each step down the porch stairs I had been carried up and down like a sack of flour, was a reclamation. My legs were steady. My will was iron. Mr. Harrison was holding the car door open for me. I got in, sinking into the soft leather of the passenger seat. He closed the door, and the sound of Sarah's shrieking was instantly muffled, then silenced as he started the engine. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly, and I kept my eyes on the road ahead. There was no joy in my heart. No triumphant surge. There was only a profound, aching emptiness, a hollowed-out space where a family used to be. And beneath it all, the quiet, steady hum of liberation. The house, the money, the beautiful things they had coveted. It was never about any of it. It was about the truth. It was about reclaiming the respect they had tried to strip from me, one cold meal and one cruel laugh at a time. Now I live in a condo by the sea. The salt-laced wind is a constant companion, whispering through my open balcony door. The legal battles are a distant memory, settled and sealed in manila folders. David and Sarah's fall was as public as it was predictable. The story, fueled by leaked audio and Leo's own incriminating videos, went viral. They became digital pariahs, their names synonymous with greed and ingratitude. They are mired in debt, their social standing ruined, their future a bleak landscape of consequences. I won. By every metric, I emerged the victor. But every evening I sit on my balcony and watch the sun bleed into the horizon, painting the waves in strokes of orange and purple. And in the rhythmic crash and retreat of the tide, I remember. I remember the laughter of a little boy with scraped knees and a gap-toothed grin. A boy who once built me a lopsided castle out of Lego, and told me I was the queen of the whole world. I remember the weight of his small hand in mine. I saved myself, but I lost my son. I tore down the prison they had built for me, but in doing so, I had to acknowledge that the love I thought was its foundation had been a phantom all along. Some truths are bought at a price too terrible to fathom. I am free, but my freedom is a solitary country. This victory, this hard-won peace feels exactly like a funeral.